What if one act of kindness could change your entire life? Samantha Miller, a struggling single mother, never expected that helping an elderly woman on the street would lead her into the world of unimaginable wealth, deep-seated secrets, and a man whose heart was locked away behind layers of pain. Alexander Hastings, a billionaire raised to trust no one, sees Samantha as nothing more than another person trying to take advantage of his family, until fate proves him wrong. Through moments of undeniable tension, heart-stopping chemistry, and a past that refuses to stay buried, Samantha and Alexander find themselves caught in a battle between love and fear, forgiveness and revenge. When the ghosts of Alexander's past return, threatening everything, Samantha must decide, will she fight for the love she never expected, or will she walk away before it's too late? Get ready for a story of redemption, romance, and unexpected second chances. If you love gripping, emotional stories that leave a lasting impression, you won't want to miss this one. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe so you never miss a story that will keep your heart racing and your emotions soaring. Now, let's dive in. A struggling single mom helped an elderly woman. What happened next changed her life forever. The New York streets glistened under the light drizzle. The golden hues of autumn leaves scattered across the sidewalks. Samantha Miller pulled the hood of her thin jacket tighter around her head as she hurried down the street, one hand gripping the small fingers of her 6-year-old son, Jake. It was another long day at the cafe where she worked, and exhaustion settled deep in her bones. "Mommy, can we get hot chocolate?" Jake's voice piped up, his bright blue eyes shining with hope despite the chilly weather. Samantha smiled down at him, brushing his damp blonde curls from his forehead. "How about we make some at home? Extra marshmallows." Jake pouted but nodded, squeezing her hand. "Deal." As they turned the corner onto Fifth Avenue, Samantha barely had a moment to react before a figure stumbled forward, slipping on a wet patch of pavement. A cry escaped the woman's lips as she crumpled to the ground, her cane clattering beside her. Without hesitation, Samantha rushed forward, instinct kicking in. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She knelt beside the older woman, noting her elegant gray coat and pearl earrings, though her face was etched with deep lines of age and a certain loneliness. The woman winced, clearly in pain. "My ankle. I think I twisted it." Jake, ever curious, peered down at her. "You fell really hard, lady." "Jake," Samantha scolded softly before turning back to the woman. "Can you move your foot?" The woman attempted to shift, but hissed at the pain. Samantha sighed, glancing around. The streets were busy, but no one stopped. New York's infamous indifference. "All right, let me help you up," Samantha said, adjusting her grip under the woman's arm. "We should get you somewhere warm." "Thank you, dear," the woman said, her voice softer now, touched by Samantha's kindness. "My name is Eleanor Hastings." Samantha froze momentarily. Hastings. That name wasn't just recognizable, it was legendary. The Hastings family was old money, one of the wealthiest dynasties in the country, and this woman, this frail, elegant woman, was the Eleanor Hastings, the matriarch of the empire. If Eleanor noticed Samantha's momentary shock, she didn't comment on it. Instead, she gave a small smile. "You have a strong grip." Samantha swallowed. Years of carrying groceries in one hand and a 6-year-old in the other. Eleanor chuckled, the sound warm despite the cold air. "I see." A sleek black car suddenly pulled up to the curb, its presence demanding attention. The back door opened and a man stepped out, tall, impeccably dressed, sharp, angular features with dark, piercing eyes that scanned the scene with authority. Alexander Hastings. His gaze landed on Eleanor, and something flickered in his expression. Concern. Yes, but also tightly contained anger. "Grandmother," he said in a clipped tone, moving toward them. "What happened?" Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "Just a small fall. This young woman was kind enough to help me." Alexander's gaze snapped to Samantha. There was nothing warm in his expression. It was assessing, scrutinizing, as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve. Samantha straightened, suddenly feeling defensive under his scrutiny. She twisted her ankle. She should see a doctor. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Thank you for your help, miss." "Samantha," she replied, crossing her arms. His eyes flicked down to Jake, who was watching him with wide-eyed fascination. "And you are?" "Jake," the boy said enthusiastically. "You have a really fancy car." A muscle ticked in Alexander's jaw, but he didn't respond to the observation. Instead, he turned back to Samantha. "I'll take care of my grandmother." "From here." The words were polite, but the undertone was clear. "You can go now," Samantha bristled. "You're welcome." A flicker of something, annoyance, amusement, passed through Alexander's dark eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. Eleanor, however, didn't seem eager to let Samantha go so quickly. "Nonsense! You helped me. The least I can do is offer you dinner." Samantha hesitated. Every instinct told her to politely decline, but then she looked at Jake, his hopeful eyes, the way he stared at the sleek car as if it were something out of a dream. He had so little in his life. Maybe just this once. "We don't want to intrude," she said carefully. "It's not an intrusion," Eleanor assured. "It's an invitation." Samantha glanced at Alexander, expecting protest, but his expression remained unreadable. Finally, she exhaled. "All right. Thank you." Jake beamed. "Do rich people eat pizza?" Eleanor laughed, the sound genuinely delighted. "I suppose we do." Alexander looked skyward as if praying for patience. As Samantha and Jake followed them to the car, she felt the distinct, icy weight of Alexander's gaze on her. He didn't trust her. That much was obvious. And she knew men like him, calculating, ruthless. The kind who had learned that love was transactional. She didn't need his approval. She didn't need anything from him. But for the first time in a long time, she had a sinking feeling that stepping into that car would change her life forever. Samantha adjusted Jake's collar as they stepped out of the sleek black car in front of the Hastings estate. The grand mansion loomed before them, its tall windows glowing with warm light against the evening sky. Despite Eleanor's welcoming demeanor, Samantha felt the weight of Alexander's scrutiny like a storm cloud hanging over her. Jake, on the other hand, was practically bouncing with excitement. "Whoa, Mom, this place is like a castle." Eleanor chuckled, patting his head. "I suppose you could say that, dear." Alexander, who had been walking ahead, stopped at the grand doorway and turned to face them, his sharp eyes barely concealed. His irritation. "We don't usually invite strangers into our home." Samantha met his gaze head-on. "Then maybe next time you should let your grandmother fall." Eleanor let out a startled laugh, while Alexander's jaw visibly tensed. Before he could snap back, a butler appeared, opening the heavy oak doors and gesturing them inside. The moment they entered, Samantha was struck by the opulence. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with classic art. It felt like stepping into another world, one she had no place in. "Mrs. Hastings," the butler addressed Eleanor with a respectful nod. "Shall I have dinner prepared for our guests?" "Yes, Bernard, thank you," Eleanor replied smoothly. "Something comforting, perhaps." Alexander, who had been silently observing, finally spoke. "I hope you don't expect this to be a regular occurrence." Samantha crossed her arms. "Don't worry, I don't make a habit of dining with condescending billionaires." Jake pulled at her sleeve. "Mom, what's condescending?" Eleanor placed a reassuring hand on Samantha's shoulder. "Ignore him, dear. He's always been a terrible host." They were led to an elegant dining room where a long table stretched nearly the length of the room. Samantha sat next to Jake, across from Eleanor, while Alexander sat at the far end. "I assume you work, Miss Miller?" Alexander finally asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Samantha raised an eyebrow. "I do. I wait tables, I clean, and I do whatever it takes to provide for my son. Is that a problem?" Alexander didn't flinch. "No, just an observation." Eleanor sighed dramatically. "Alexander, stop interrogating our guest. You act as if she's a criminal." He shrugged. "I like to know who's dining in my home." Before Samantha could retort, Jake spoke up. "Are you a king?" Alexander blinked. "Excuse me?" Jake pointed to the grand room. You have a giant house, a butler, and you act all serious. You remind me of a king in one of my storybooks." Eleanor burst out laughing while Alexander simply sighed. "I am not a king." Jake nodded. "Okay, but you're grumpy like one." Samantha stifled a laugh while Alexander rubbed his temple. The butler arrived with steaming plates of food, and the conversation temporarily paused. Halfway through dinner, Eleanor leaned toward Samantha. "Tell me, dear, do you have family in the city?" Samantha hesitated before shaking her head. "It's just me and Jake." Eleanor's eyes softened. "That must be difficult." "We manage," Samantha said with quiet strength. Alexander cut in. "You expect me to believe you have no one to rely on?" Samantha's patience finally snapped. "I don't care what you believe, Mr. Hastings. Unlike you, I don't have the luxury of questioning everyone's motives. I work, I raise my son, and I survive. That's my reality." Silence settled over the table. Eleanor looked amused, Jake looked confused, and Alexander, he looked almost impressed. After dinner, Eleanor gave Jake a tour of the estate, leaving Samantha and Alexander alone in the dining room. The air was thick with tension. "You don't trust me," Samantha stated. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I don't trust anyone easily, and I certainly don't trust people who suddenly appear in my grandmother's life." She crossed her arms. "I didn't appear. I helped her when no one else did." For the first time, Alexander seemed to hesitate. A flicker of something, doubt, crossed his features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Eleanor and Jake returned, the little boy chattering excitedly about the mansion's hidden library. Samantha took his hand and stood. "Thank you for dinner, Eleanor. We should get going." Eleanor smiled warmly. "It was my pleasure, and I do hope we'll see you again." Alexander didn't say a word as Samantha and Jake left, but as he watched them disappear into the night, he found himself unsettled. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had stood up to him, and he wasn't sure how he felt about it. The cold air bit at Samantha's cheeks as she and Jake walked away from the Hastings estate. Despite the warmth of the luxurious dinner, a chill still ran through her, though she wasn't sure if it was from the night air or the lingering tension with Alexander Hastings. "Mom, do you think we'll see them again?" Jake asked, skipping beside her. Samantha glanced down at her son and offered a small smile. "I don't know, sweetheart, but it was nice of Eleanor to invite us." Jake nodded, clearly satisfied. "She's like a fairy godmother, don't you think?" Samantha chuckled. "Maybe. But what she left unsaid was that every fairy tale had its villain, and she had a strong feeling Alexander saw her in that role." Meanwhile, inside the estate, Alexander paced near the fireplace in his study. He had barely touched his drink, when replaying the evening's events. Samantha Miller was unlike anyone who had ever entered his life. She was strong, fiercely independent, and infuriatingly unaffected by his wealth or presence. Eleanor sat nearby, watching him with an amused expression. "She got under your skin, didn't she?" Alexander scowled. "She's different, too. Different." She didn't flinch at his name, didn't fawn over his wealth, and she certainly didn't hesitate to challenge him. Most people either feared or revered him, but she did neither. That made her unpredictable. And unpredictability was dangerous. "Different doesn't mean bad," Eleanor said softly. "You judge too quickly." "I don't judge," Alexander countered, though even as he said it, he wasn't sure it was true. He had spent years learning to see people's ulterior motives before they could exploit him. He had spent years ensuring no one got too close. Eleanor sighed and shook her head. "You're so much like your grandfather, stubborn, afraid to trust. He was the same when we first met, guarded, convinced that the world was waiting to take advantage of him. It took years for him to realize that trust isn't weakness. It's a choice, one that leads to something far greater than power or wealth." "I see that same battle in you, Alexander." Alexander exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I'm not afraid of anything." Eleanor smirked. "If you say so." She studied him for a moment, then stood, walking toward the bookshelf where a framed photo sat. It was an old picture, her late husband standing proudly beside a young Alexander. She held it in her hands, her fingers tracing over the image. "You used to trust people once," she murmured. "But somewhere along the way you let that go." Alexander clenched his jaw but said nothing. The next morning, Samantha was back at the cafe, wiping down tables as the morning rush slowed. The air smelled of freshly brewed coffee and cinnamon pastries, and the faint hum of conversation filled the space. She barely had time to take a breath before the front door swung open with a sharp chime, letting in a gust of cold morning air. The scent of fresh rain mixed with coffee and cinnamon, but all warmth seemed to evaporate as a man in a suit strode in. His presence was like an uninvited storm, imposing, calculated, and unwavering. Conversations dimmed to a murmur, and heads subtly turned as Alexander Hastings surveyed the cafe, his sharp gaze zeroing in on her. Not just any man, Alexander. Hastings, the cafe suddenly felt smaller. The murmurs of customers quieted as they took notice of the billionaire standing in their midst, looking completely out of place in his impeccably tailored suit. Samantha straightened, setting down her rag. "To what do I owe this honor?" she asked dryly, crossing her arms. Alexander ignored her sarcasm and held up a paper. "My grandmother wants you and Jake to attend a charity gala with her this weekend." Samantha blinked. "What?" "She insists," he added. "And when Eleanor insists, people listen." Samantha hesitated. She had no interest in galas or mingling with the elite, but saying no to Eleanor felt wrong. The older woman had been nothing but kind to her and Jake, and refusing would feel like a betrayal. Jake, who had been coloring at a nearby table, perked up. "A party, like the ones in the movies?" Alexander gave a curt nod. "Exactly like that." Jake's eyes widened with excitement. "Do I get to wear a suit?" Samantha sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Fine, but I'm not dressing up like Cinderella." A corner of Alexander's mouth twitched. "No one's asking you to." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Why are you really doing this?" Alexander paused at the door. For a moment, it seemed like he might actually answer. His expression flickered, something between annoyance and intrigue. Then with a smirk, he simply said, "You'll find out soon enough." And with that, he was gone, leaving Samantha more intrigued and irritated than ever. She exhaled slowly, leaning against the counter. A charity gala? She had no business attending something so extravagant. But as she glanced at Jake, who was practically bouncing with excitement, she knew there was no turning back now. Later that evening, as she tucked Jake into bed, her mind raced with a mix of emotions she couldn't quite place. Anxiety prickled at the edges of her thoughts. What if she embarrassed herself at the gala? What if Alexander used this as an opportunity to humiliate her? But beneath the nerves was a flicker of excitement, an unfamiliar thrill at the thought of stepping into a world so vastly different from her own. A world where, for one night, she wouldn't just be the struggling single mother. She would be someone seen, someone acknowledged. Yet, as much as she wanted to push away the doubt, the weight of Alexander's gaze lingered in her mind. Was it suspicion, or something else entirely? Why had Eleanor really invited them? And why did Alexander look at her like she was some kind of puzzle he couldn't quite solve? As she turned off the light and slipped into bed herself, she had the unsettling feeling that this was only the beginning of something far more complicated than she had anticipated. The day of the gala arrived faster than Samantha expected. The morning had been a whirlwind of trying to find something appropriate to wear, convincing Jake that a suit wasn't the worst thing in the world, and mentally preparing herself for an evening spent among people who lived in a world so different from her own. The dress Eleanor had arranged for her was breathtaking, elegant but not overly extravagant, a deep midnight blue that complemented her features. As she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate silver necklace that accompanied it, a rare feeling crept into her chest, confidence. Just for tonight, she wouldn't be the struggling single mother barely making ends meet. Jake, dressed in a miniature version of a formal suit, bounced on his feet. "Mom, you look like a princess," Samantha laughed, ruffling his hair. And you, sir, look like a very handsome young man. The sleek black car Eleanor had sent arrived right on time. Samantha took a deep breath before stepping in, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her. The Hastings estate was even more dazzling than before, now illuminated by golden lights and filled with the elite of New York society. As they entered the grand ballroom, Samantha felt dozens of eyes land on her. Whispers floated through the air. Who was this woman Eleanor Hastings had personally invited? Why was Alexander Hastings escorting her and a child into their world? She was used to feeling out of place, but tonight, she wasn't alone. Jake's small hand clutched hers, and when she looked up, her eyes met Eleanor's warm gaze across the room. "You made it." Eleanor greeted them with a smile, pressing a gentle kiss to Jake's forehead. "And you both look wonderful." Alexander, standing beside his grandmother, didn't say anything at first. His eyes traced over Samantha's silhouette, taking in the elegance of the midnight blue dress, the way it hugged her form in a way that was both modest and breathtaking. This was not the woman he had met in the cafe, the one who defied him with sharp remarks and a guarded demeanor. This was someone entirely different, someone who belonged in this world, even if she didn't believe it herself, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. His dark gaze swept over Samantha, taking in the transformation. Something flickered in his eyes, something she couldn't quite decipher. "You clean up well," he finally said, his voice even but tinged with something she almost mistook for admiration. Samantha smirked. "I'll take that as a compliment." Before he could respond, a voice called out, rich and honeyed, yet edged with an unmistakable possessiveness. "Alexander, darling, there you are." The woman's heels clicked purposefully against the marble floor, her gown shimmering under the chandelier's glow. Each movement was calculated, her posture exuding confidence as though she owned the very air in the room. The saccharine sweetness in her tone barely concealed the underlying curiosity, or perhaps territoriality. A woman in a sleek, glittering gown approached them, her expression one of barely concealed curiosity. Samantha recognized her instantly. Claudia Davenport, a socialite known for being in the inner circle of the Hastings family, and once rumored to have been romantically involved with Alexander. Though their relationship had never been publicly confirmed, the whispers of a past connection lingered, adding an undercurrent of tension to her presence now. Her eyes flickered toward Samantha before turning to Alexander. "And who is your lovely guest?" Claudia's smile was saccharine, her interest obvious. Samantha opened her mouth to answer, but Alexander spoke first. "She's a friend of my grandmother's." Something about the way he said it made Samantha's stomach tighten, a reminder, perhaps, that she didn't belong in this world. Eleanor, sensing the shift in the conversation, quickly intervened. "Samantha, why don't you and Jake join me on the balcony for a moment? The view of the city is spectacular tonight." Grateful for the escape, Samantha nodded, guiding Jake away from the growing crowd of curious guests. As they stepped onto the balcony, the crisp evening air filled her lungs, bringing a much-needed sense of calm. She turned toward Eleanor. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm not sure I belong here." Eleanor smiled knowingly. "Belonging isn't about wealth, my dear. It's about presence. And you, Samantha, have a presence that many of these people lack." Samantha exhaled slowly, letting the words settle in. Before she could respond, a loud crash echoed through the ballroom, the sound of shattered glass piercing the air. A collective gasp rippled through the guests, followed by the scraping of chairs and hurried footsteps. Samantha's heart lurched as she turned sharply toward the grand hall. Eleanor's usually composed expression faltered, her brows knitting. Together in concern, Jake clutched at Samantha's dress, his small fingers tightening instinctively. "Mom, what was that?" he whispered, eyes wide with apprehension. Alexander, who had stepped onto the balcony just moments before, tensed, his jaw tightening as he assessed the disturbance. Without a word, he strode forward, his movements swift and controlled, every inch the man used to commanding a situation. Samantha hesitated only for a second before following, a sense of unease settling in her stomach. Something was wrong. Very, Wrong. Frowning, she turned back toward the grand hall, her heart pounding. Something was wrong, and she had a feeling this was just the beginning. The commotion inside the ballroom was like a wave of chaos rolling through the opulent hall. Samantha followed Alexander and Eleanor through the doors, her breath catching at the sight before her. A shattered champagne tower lay in ruins at the center of the dance floor, golden liquid pooling beneath the broken crystal. Waitstaff hurriedly cleaned up the mess while guests whispered among themselves, eyes darting toward a figure in the middle of it all. A man in a disheveled tuxedo stood unsteadily, his face flushed from either embarrassment or alcohol, perhaps both. Samantha recognized him from the tabloids. Richard Langley, a businessman known for his reckless behavior, and once a close associate of Alexander. Alexander let out a sigh, his expression unreadable. I should have expected this. Richard had always been reckless, but it hadn't always been this bad. There was a time when they had been friends, back when trust had come easier and expectations were simpler. But power had a way of warping people, and Richard had succumbed to its vices in ways Alexander never allowed himself to. Tonight was just another reminder of how far they'd drifted, and perhaps a warning of what he could become if he ever let his guard down. Claudia reappeared, looping her arm through Alexander's as if to reclaim her territory. Poor Richard, she purred, her eyes gleaming with amusement. He's had a bit too much to drink again. Alexander gently but firmly extricated himself from her grasp. Excuse me. He strode toward Richard, his movements efficient and controlled. Samantha watched as he leaned in, murmuring something too low for her to hear. Whatever he said had an effect. Richard stiffened, nodded, and allowed himself to be escorted out by security. Eleanor sighed beside her. These events always attract trouble in one form or another. Samantha nodded, still processing what she had witnessed. Alexander had handled the situation with precision, but there was something else beneath the surface. Frustration? Resignation? She wasn't sure. Just then, Eleanor turned to her. Would you mind taking Jake to the library for a bit? I believe this room has had enough excitement for the evening. Samantha glanced down at Jake, who had been gripping her dress tightly, his eyes wide with curiosity. That sounds like a great idea. The library was a stunning room filled with towering bookshelves and plush chairs that seemed to invite guests to lose themselves in a story. The scent of aged parchment and polished mahogany filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of a lingering fire in the grand stone hearth. Soft lamplight cast warm pools of gold across the thick rugs, and the quiet rustle of pages turning added to the hushed, reverent atmosphere. It was a place of knowledge, of escape, a world within a world. Jake immediately rushed to a corner where a selection of children's books was placed, his earlier worry forgotten. Samantha exhaled, allowing herself a moment of quiet. She traced her fingers along the spines of the books, feeling the weight of the evening settle in her bones. This world was dazzling, but it was exhausting. You don't seem like someone easily shaken. She turned sharply at the voice behind her. Alexander stood in the doorway, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the dimly lit room. His gaze was curious yet unreadable, a flicker of something restrained beneath the cool veneer. His fingers flexed briefly at his sides before he took a deliberate step forward, his expression a careful balance between intrigue and caution. The faintest furrow creased his brow, as though he were piecing together a puzzle he hadn't realized existed until this moment. She crossed her arms. I've learned not to be. He stepped closer, his movements slower now, as if choosing his words carefully. This isn't your world, and yet you handle yourself as if it could be. Samantha scoffed. You say that like it's a compliment. He tilted his head slightly. Maybe it is. Their eyes met, and for the first time, Samantha saw something other than skepticism in his expression. Interest, admiration even. It made her heart beat faster, though she quickly pushed the feeling away. Jake seems to like it here, she said, shifting the subject. Alexander followed her gaze to where Jake sat flipping through a book with childlike wonder. A small smile ghosted over his lips. He's a good kid. Samantha's heart softened. He is. A comfortable silence stretched between them. Then Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his hair. This night hasn't gone as expected. Samantha raised an eyebrow. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? He hesitated before replying. I haven't decided yet. Before she could respond, the soft creak of the library door broke the silence, followed by the gentle but purposeful sound of footsteps on the polished wooden floor. Eleanor entered the library, her sharp gaze sweeping across the room before settling on them. Ah, here you are. I was just telling the staff to prepare a room in case you'd like to stay the night. Samantha blinked. Stay? Eleanor smiled. It's quite late and the storm outside has worsened. I wouldn't want you traveling in this weather. Samantha turned to Alexander, expecting him to object, but he merely shrugged. It's safer. She hesitated. Every instinct told her that accepting would mean stepping further into a world she didn't belong in. But then she looked at Jake, curled up in a chair, already half asleep. Maybe just for one night. She nodded. All right, Eleanor beamed. Wonderful. I'll have everything arranged. As the older woman exited, Samantha turned back to Alexander. This doesn't change anything, she said firmly. Something in his expression softened. I wouldn't dream of it. Yet as he left, Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that things had already begun to change. Samantha awoke to the sound of raindrops pattering against the large windows of the guest suite. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The luxurious silk sheets, the ornate ceiling molding, and the scent of fresh linen were foreign to her usual cramped apartment. She turned her head slightly and found Jake still curled up beside her, his small face peaceful in sleep. The memory of the previous night rushed back, the gala, the commotion, and most unsettling of all, the conversations with Alexander. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was hesitant, almost uncertain, followed by a brief silence, and then another, firmer rap. Samantha's pulse quickened as she glanced at Jake, still fast asleep, before stepping cautiously toward the door. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard muffled voices just beyond it, but as she strained to listen, the sound was gone. She hesitated, a strange feeling creeping into her chest, before finally opening it. She quickly slipped out of bed, wrapping a robe around herself before opening it. A maid stood there, offering a polite smile. Mrs. Hastings has asked for you to join her for breakfast in the sunroom. Samantha hesitated. She wasn't used to this level of courtesy. Thank you, I'll be down soon. Minutes later, dressed, in the same clothes from last night, but as put together as possible, she made her way downstairs. The sunroom was warm and inviting, bathed in soft morning light. Eleanor sat at a round table stirring her tea. She looked up as Samantha approached and gestured to the seat across from her. I trust you slept well? Eleanor asked, her tone kind but observant. As well as can be expected, Samantha admitted, glancing around. This place is something else. Eleanor chuckled. I imagine it's quite different from what you're used to. Samantha appreciated the honesty. She had no illusions that her world and theirs were the same. As she reached for a cup of coffee, the sound of approaching footsteps made her pause. Alexander appeared in the doorway, dressed casually yet still exuding that effortless authority. His gaze briefly met Samantha's before he took a seat beside his grandmother. I see you decided to stay, he remarked, his voice unreadable. Weather didn't give me much of a choice, Samantha countered, taking a sip of her coffee. Eleanor watched the exchange with quiet amusement. I was hoping we could have a proper conversation this morning. Samantha tensed slightly. About you, Eleanor said simply. And what brought you into our lives? Samantha blinked, caught off guard. I didn't intend to intrude. I just helped you that day on the street. And I'm grateful, Eleanor interrupted gently. But let's not pretend. Last night didn't change things. You're involved now, whether you realize it or not. Samantha glanced at Alexander, who studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. I don't know what you mean. Eleanor placed her cup down delicately. her fingers lingering on the porcelain for a moment longer than necessary. A flicker of hesitation crossed her features, as if she were debating whether to reveal more. Her lips parted slightly, then pressed, together in thought, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, she exhaled softly, smoothing the napkin on her lap, before meeting Samantha's gaze with an unreadable expression. This family is watched, scrutinized. People who enter our world rarely go unnoticed. You've already caught attention, some curious, some suspicious. Samantha swallowed hard. I don't want anything from you. That's exactly why I'm interested in you, Eleanor said, a knowing smile on her lips. Most people do. Alexander leaned back in his chair. You say that now, but what happens when you realize just how much is at stake? Samantha's frustration flared. I don't need a lecture on integrity. I've spent my whole life fighting to survive. I don't have the luxury of playing games. Alexander's jaw tightened at her words, but something in his eyes softened. Just slightly. Eleanor sighed. I didn't mean to put you on edge, dear, but there are things you don't yet know. Things about this family, about Alexander's past, that explain why trust is not freely given. A beat of silence passed before. Samantha spoke. Then tell me. Alexander stiffened, clearly not expecting her directness, but Eleanor only smiled. In time. A maid entered, whispering something into Eleanor's ear. Samantha caught a single word, investigation, before the hushed conversation ended. Eleanor's expression darkened ever so slightly before. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the edge of her teacup. I must take care of something, but please, enjoy breakfast. The older woman's expression darkened ever so slightly before she nodded. I must take care of something, but please, enjoy breakfast. As she exited, Samantha found herself alone with Alexander. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with something unspoken. Alexander remained still for a moment, his fingers drumming lightly against the polished wood of the table. His jaw tightened, then relaxed, as if debating whether to say something or let the silence stretch between them. His eyes flickered over her face, searching, questioning. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, more measured, almost reluctant. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken words. Finally, he leaned forward, his gaze steady. You don't belong in this world, Samantha. And the more you stay, the more complicated things will get. Samantha met his gaze head-on. Maybe, but I think you're afraid I'll prove you wrong. For the first time, Alexander had no response. The weight of Alexander's unreadable stare lingered in Samantha's mind long after breakfast had ended. The storm outside had begun to calm, though the thick gray clouds still loomed heavily over the estate. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, not by Eleanor, whose curiosity was transparent, but by forces unseen, the very ones that had made Eleanor's expression darken when she heard the word investigation. She found herself wandering the halls of the estate, drawn by the quiet grandeur of the space. The dim light from the chandeliers flickered against the polished marble floors, casting shifting shadows that danced along the walls. A distant echo of footsteps, perhaps a servant or someone unseen, sent a faint chill down her spine. The scent of aged wood and faint traces of Eleanor's perfume lingered in the air, making the mansion feel both alive and hauntingly still. The tapestries, the antique furniture, the massive windows overlooking the vast gardens. It was a world, so far removed from her own that it felt surreal. And yet it was dangerously easy to let herself imagine belonging here. Lost in thought, she nearly jumped when a voice spoke from behind her. You're a curious one. Alexander. Samantha turned to find him leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, his expression guarded. The way he watched her sent a shiver down her spine. Not of fear, but of something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. I just needed air, she said, forcing herself to sound indifferent. It's a lot to take in. Alexander stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. I know. His voice carried an undertone of something she couldn't quite place. Weariness, perhaps? Regret? It wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was a confession, and that realization sent an unexpected shiver through her. His tone surprised her. It wasn't sharp or condescending. It was softer, almost resigned, like he understood exactly how suffocating this world could be. Samantha tilted her head. "What happened to you?" His jaw tightened. "What do you mean? You act like you have to be suspicious of everyone, like you're carrying something too heavy to put down." For a moment, Alexander didn't answer. His fingers clenched at his sides before he exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "That's because I am." She waited, letting the silence stretch, knowing that if she spoke too soon, he'd shut down again. Finally, he looked at her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "People don't just want money, Samantha. They want control. They want power. And when they can't have it, they'll settle for ruining those who do." Samantha swallowed. "And someone tried to ruin you?" Alexander let out a humorless laugh. "Someone did. Someone I trusted. They built me up just to watch me fall. And they nearly succeeded." His fingers curled into a fist at his side, as if reliving the betrayal. "Trust, Samantha, is the most expensive currency in this world. And I paid the price for believing it could be given freely." She took a hesitant step closer. "What happened?" Before he could answer, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, sending a chill through the hall. The storm outside wasn't quite finished yet. Alexander turned away, his posture rigid. "You should go back to your room." But Samantha didn't move. Something about the way his shoulders tensed, the way his breath hitched ever so slightly, told her that this was a rare moment. A moment where the cracks in his armor had appeared, however briefly. "Alexander," he turned sharply, his gaze burning into hers. "You don't understand what you're asking." Her heart pounded. "Then help me understand." For a second, something flashed in his expression, something that made her breath catch. And then, before she could fully register what was happening, he was stepping closer, closing the space between them. It was reckless. It was inevitable. His lips brushed against hers, tentative at first, as if testing the boundaries of a moment neither of them had planned for. The world around them seemed to still. Her pulse thundered in her ears, the warmth of his breath mingling with hers. The distant patter of rain against the windows became a mere whisper, drowned out by the intoxicating heat of their proximity. Then something shifted. The tension that had been simmering beneath the surface for days finally snapped, and the kiss deepened. Warm, searching, filled with something neither of them dared to name. And just as quickly as it had begun, Alexander pulled back, his breathing uneven, his expression unreadable once more. "This can't happen." Samantha's mind was spinning. "Then why did you—" "Because I forgot myself for a moment," he admitted, his voice hoarse. "And that's dangerous." She stared at him, searching his face, but he had already started pulling away. The walls were going back up. Whatever she had glimpsed just moments ago was slipping through her fingers, and she wasn't sure she wanted to. Let it go. Samantha barely slept that night. Her mind was a storm of thoughts replaying the moment she and Alexander had shared. The raw vulnerability in his eyes, the heat of his lips against hers. And yet, just as quickly as he had let his walls down, he had built them back up, shutting her out once more. By the time morning arrived, the storm outside had passed, but the unease in her chest had not. Jake was still asleep when she slipped out of the room, her feet carrying her toward the library, where she suspected Eleanor would be. If anyone could shed light on the enigma that was Alexander Hastings, it was her. She found Eleanor seated in a grand wingback chair, a book resting in her lap, though her gaze was distant. The golden morning light streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the quiet wisdom on the older woman's face. "You're up early," Eleanor noted, looking up at Samantha with knowing eyes. "Something on your mind, dear?" Samantha hesitated before stepping forward. "I wanted to ask you something about Alexander." Eleanor sighed, setting her book aside. "I thought you might." Samantha sat across from her, folding her hands in her lap. He said something last night. That trust is the most expensive currency in this world. That he paid the price for believing it could be given freely. Eleanor's expression softened with something between sadness and understanding. Alexander has not had an easy path, Samantha. He wasn't always like this. Samantha's brows furrowed. What happened? Eleanor leaned back slightly, her fingers tracing the rim of her teacup. A faint tremor ran through them before she steadied herself, her eyes momentarily clouded with a memory she had yet to share. She hesitated, as if weighing whether to reveal something more, before finally speaking, her voice softer, almost distant. Many years ago he loved someone, deeply, and he believed she loved him in return. But she was not the woman she pretended to be. Samantha felt a pang in her chest. She betrayed him? In the worst way, Eleanor said quietly. She manipulated him, gained his trust, and when he was most vulnerable, she used that trust to destroy him. She nearly took everything from him, his reputation, his fortune, his belief in people. Samantha's breath caught. That's why he's so guarded, Eleanor nodded. He learned a painful lesson and unfortunately it hardened him. Samantha swallowed the lump in her throat. She had sensed the pain beneath Alexander's cold exterior, but hearing it confirmed in Eleanor's words made it all the more real. He's afraid to let anyone in, Samantha murmured. Eleanor smiled sadly. That's precisely it. But I see something in you, Samantha. You unsettle him. Not in a bad way, mind you, but you challenge the walls he's built around himself. Samantha glanced down at her hands. I don't know if that's a good thing. Eleanor reached forward, gently placing her hand over Samantha's. It is, because whether he realizes it or not, he needs someone who won't give up on him. Samantha exhaled deeply, her mind spinning. The weight of Eleanor's words settled over her like a heavy truth. Could she be that person for Alexander? And more importantly, did she want to be? Before she could say anything more, a sudden knock at the doctor echoed through the library. The sound was firm, deliberate, too heavy to be just another routine visit. Samantha stiffened, sensing the shift in atmosphere, the way the once calm air now carried an undercurrent of tension. A butler entered, his expression grave. Mrs. Hastings, he said respectfully. There's a situation that requires your attention. Eleanor's face darkened slightly. What is it? The butler hesitated before glancing at Samantha. Perhaps we should discuss this in private. Eleanor pursed her lips but nodded. Yet, as she stood, there was a flicker of something else. In her expression, reluctance or perhaps worry. She smoothed the front of her dress, a small but telling gesture of composure, before offering Samantha a fleeting, unreadable glance. Excuse me, my dear. I'll return shortly. As Eleanor rose and exited the room, Samantha remained seated, a sense of unease creeping into her chest. Something was happening, something bigger than just Alexander's trust issues, and she had the sinking feeling that she was about to be caught in the middle of it. The library doors closed behind Eleanor, leaving Samantha alone with her swirling thoughts. The weight of the conversation still lingered. Alexander's past, his walls, the way she had started to see glimpses of the man beneath the armor. And, now, there was something else. Something Eleanor hadn't shared yet, but that the butler's grave expression had hinted at. The unease in her chest deepened. She stood abruptly, her feet carrying her toward the large windows overlooking the estate's garden. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast as if reflecting the uncertainty settling in her mind. A flicker of movement near the main gate caught her eye. A man in a dark coat stood near the estate's entrance, speaking to one of the security guards. His posture was tense, and even from this distance, something about him seemed off. Samantha had lived through enough hardships to recognize when something didn't feel right. Her instincts had been honed by years of navigating life's uncertainties, eviction notices, empty bank accounts, people who made promises they never intended to keep. And now that same instinct screamed at her, warning that something about this man wasn't just unusual, It was dangerous. She was about to turn away when the man glanced toward the house, and for a brief moment, she could have sworn he was looking straight at her. A chill ran down her spine. Before she could process it further, the library doors swung open again. But it wasn't Eleanor. It was Alexander. His face was a mask of irritation, his steps quick and controlled. Samantha barely had time to speak before he did. "What did my grandmother tell you?" His tone wasn't cold, but there was an unmistakable edge to it, the kind that made Samantha's pulse quicken with irritation. "She told me the truth," she said, crossing her arms. "That? Someone betrayed you. That you don't trust people because you think they'll use you." Alexander's jaw clenched. "And what? You feel sorry for me now?" His voice carried an edge of something deeper than anger, something raw, barely restrained. There was a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, a fleeting vulnerability that vanished, just as quickly as it appeared, buried beneath years of practiced indifference. Samantha exhaled sharply, stepping forward. "This isn't about pity, Alexander. It's about understanding. And whether you want to admit it or not, you let your past dictate everything about your present. You push people away before they even get a chance to prove they're different." Scoffed, shaking his head. "You think you're different?" Her throat tightened. "I know I am." The words hung in the air, electric with something neither of them wanted to name. Samantha felt her pulse quicken, aware of how close they stood now, the unspoken tension crackling between them. Alexander's fingers twitched at his side, as if he were debating whether to reach for something, or someone, before his defenses slammed back into place. Samantha could see the war in his eyes, the battle between keeping his defenses up and letting her in. But before either of them could say anything more, a commotion erupted from the front of the estate, a raised voice, a struggle, the sharp command of security guards. Alexander turned toward the sound immediately, his expression darkening. Samantha followed as he strode out of the library, tension crackling in the air. When they reached the entrance hall, they found Eleanor standing near the grand staircase, her normally calm demeanor shaken. The butler and a few security personnel were gathered near the doors, holding back the man Samantha had seen at the gates earlier. "Who is he?" Samantha whispered. Alexander's face was unreadable, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "A problem." Eleanor turned to them, her lips pressed into a tight line. A heavy silence stretched before she spoke, as if she were carefully choosing her words. "We need to talk." Her voice was composed, but her fingers tightened around the silk fabric of her sleeve. A small, almost imperceptible gesture that told Samantha one thing. Eleanor Hastings was worried, and that meant whatever was happening now was bigger than any of them had realized. The man struggled against the guards, his voice loud and unhinged. "You can't keep the truth buried forever, Hastings. Sooner or later it all comes out." Samantha's pulse pounded. She wasn't sure what kind of storm she had just stepped into, but one thing was clear. It was far from over. The man's words rang through the entrance hall like a warning bell. Samantha felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she looked between Alexander and Eleanor. The tension in the air was suffocating, an unspoken truth lurking just beneath the surface. Whatever this man knew, whatever he had come here to reveal, it was something that threatened the very foundation of the Hastings family. Alexander stepped forward, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. "Get him out of here." The security guards tightened their grip on the man's arms, but he twisted violently, his voice rising. "You think you can make me disappear just like you did before? The truth always comes back, Hastings. You can't bury it forever." Eleanor inhaled sharply, her fingers twitching as though she wanted to intervene but knew she couldn't. Not yet. Samantha turned to Alexander. "What is he talking about?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. "It's nothing. It doesn't sound like nothing." His gaze flickered to hers, something dark and stormy in his expression. "Stay out of this, Samantha. That struck a nerve. Don't do that. Don't shut me out just because it's convenient for you." Before Alexander could respond, The man wrenched one arm free and shoved the nearest guard off balance. In the chaos, his wild gaze landed on Samantha. You don't know what you're stepping into, do you?" Samantha froze, a chill racing down her spine. Alexander moved instantly, positioning himself between her and the man. "Get him out, now!" This time, the security team didn't hesitate. The man was dragged toward the doors, still yelling. "You think this is over? It's just beginning. You don't get to walk away from what you did, Alexander. You don't get to—" The heavy oak doors slammed shut, cutting off his words. Silence descended over the room, but the weight of the encounter lingered like smoke after a fire. Samantha's pulse was still racing as she turned to Eleanor. "Who was that?" Eleanor hesitated before exhaling slowly. "His name is William Carter, and he's not entirely wrong." Samantha's breath caught. "Meaning?" Eleanor exchanged a glance with Alexander, whose expression remained as hard as stone. "Perhaps it's time you knew the truth." Eleanor led them into the study, a room lined with shelves of old books, heavy with the scent of leather and history. The fireplace crackled faintly, casting flickering shadows against the walls. She gestured for Samantha to sit, but Samantha remained standing, her arms crossed. "Tell me." Eleanor took a measured breath. "Years ago, there was an incident, a business deal gone wrong, a scandal that nearly destroyed this family. It involved William Carter's father." Samantha's brows furrowed. "What kind of scandal?" Alexander, who had been standing rigidly by the fireplace, finally spoke. "Carter's father was an investor in one of our largest projects, but he was reckless, dishonest. He made decisions that nearly bankrupted us. When the truth came out, he lost everything. He blamed us for his downfall." Eleanor nodded. "And his son, William, has spent years believing that Alexander orchestrated it all, that he manipulated the situation to come out on top, while his family was left to ruin." Samantha studied Alexander carefully. "And did you?" Alexander's jaw clenched. "I did what had to be done to protect this family. If I hadn't, everything would have collapsed." Samantha exhaled slowly, processing everything. "So he's back for revenge." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "It seems that way." A thick silence filled the study. Samantha could feel the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. She looked at Alexander, his face still impassive, his walls firmly back in place. "You didn't tell me any of this," she finally said. His eyes met hers. "Because it doesn't concern you." Her frustration flared. "It does if I'm caught in the crossfire." Alexander took a step closer, his presence towering, his voice lower now. "I don't want you involved in this, Samantha." She swallowed hard. "That's not your choice to make." Something in his expression shifted, just slightly. The ever-present distance between them wavered, as though for the first time, he realized she wasn't someone he could simply push away. Eleanor cleared her throat. "I think for tonight, we should all get some rest. Tomorrow, we'll decide what happens next." Samantha nodded, though she knew sleep wouldn't come easily. As she left the study, she felt Alexander's gaze linger on her, and she knew, without a doubt, that this was only the beginning. Samantha lay awake in the grand guest room, staring at the ornate ceiling. The faint crackle of the fireplace filled the room, mingling with the distant hum of rain against the windows. The air carried a lingering trace of Eleanor's signature, lavender scent, a reminder of the woman's quiet strength. Yet, despite the warmth surrounding her, Samantha felt a deep, restless chill settle in her chest. The events of the night replayed in her mind. William Carter's accusations, Eleanor's cryptic words, Alexander's unyielding walls. She had stepped into something far bigger than she'd ever anticipated. And yet, despite every instinct telling her to walk away, she couldn't. Not now. The clock on the wall struck midnight. Unable to settle her thoughts, she rose from bed, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders as she moved toward the dimly lit hallway. A pull she couldn't explain guided her toward the study, where she'd last seen Alexander. She hesitated for a moment before pushing the heavy door open. He was there. Alexander stood by the fireplace, his broad shoulders tense, his grip around a half-empty glass of whiskey almost too tight. The amber liquid swirled as he tilted the glass slightly, his fingers tapping against the crystal. A steady, unconscious rhythm that betrayed his otherwise controlled exterior. The fire cast sharp shadows along his jawline, accentuating the storm that brewed behind his gaze. He didn't turn when she entered, but she knew he was aware of her presence. "You should be asleep," he murmured. Samantha closed the door behind her, stepping forward. "So should you." A humorless smirk tugged at his lips, though his expression remained shadowed by something deeper. "Sleep doesn't come easy when your past keeps knocking at your door." She exhaled softly, watching the flickering fire cast golden hues across his face. "Alexander, what really happened between you and the Carters?" His grip tightened around the glass. "I already told you." "No," she pressed. "You told me what the world knows, but what aren't you?" Saying? For the first time, Alexander turned to face her fully. His eyes, normally so cold and unreadable, held something raw, vulnerable. He hesitated, as if waging an internal war, before finally speaking. "I trusted William's father," he admitted. "I believed in him. He was a mentor to me, someone I thought had my best interests at heart. But he made reckless decisions, cut corners, and when the business started to collapse, he tried to pin it on me." Samantha's heart clenched. "And you had to destroy him to save yourself." Alexander exhaled sharply, turning back to the fire. "I didn't set out to ruin him. I gave him chances, more than he deserved. But when it came down to it, I had to choose between his legacy and my family's future. So I made the call." Samantha took a step closer. "And you've been carrying that guilt ever since." He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The tension in his jaw, the storm in his eyes, it told her everything. She hesitated before reaching out, her fingers lightly grazing his forearm. "You did what you had to do, Alexander. You protected the people who mattered." He looked at her, then really looked at her, as if searching for something he wasn't sure he'd find. "And if I told you that's exactly why I want you to walk away," Samantha swallowed hard, "would you really let me?" A muscle in his jaw ticked. "No." The single word hung between them, charged with something unspoken. Samantha's breath hitched as Alexander closed the space between them. This wasn't like the first time. There was no hesitation, no second guessing. When he kissed her, it was with a certainty that sent her world tilting. His hands found her waist, pulling her flush against him, his grip possessive yet tender, as if grounding himself in her presence. Samantha's breath hitched, her pulse hammering in sync with the unspoken emotions hanging between them. The world outside seemed to fade, leaving only the warmth of his touch, the intoxicating scent of his cologne, and the quiet promise lingering in the space between their lips. Samantha melted into him, her fingers threading through his dark hair, every ounce of resistance dissolving in the heat between them. This wasn't just desire, it was something deeper, something neither of them had been ready to face until, now when they finally broke apart, breathless, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "You make me forget how to be careful." Samantha smiled, her heart pounding. Maybe that's not a bad thing. For the first time in a long time, Alexander let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, she was right. But outside the mansion, in the cold night air, a shadow lingered at the gates. William Carter hadn't left. He stood at the edge of the iron gates, his breath visible in the cold night air. His eyes, dark and calculating, remained fixed on the mansion, his fingers curling into fists at his sides. The glow of a nearby street lamp cast long, eerie shadows across his face, amplifying the quiet menace in his stance. He had waited years for this moment, and he wasn't going to leave without seeing it through, and he wasn't finished yet. The morning arrived with an eerie stillness. The storm had passed, but the tension from the night before lingered in the air like an unspoken warning. Samantha stirred from sleep, her body still humming with the memory of Alexander's touch, but her thoughts were elsewhere, on the man lurking at the gates, the unfinished business that threatened to unravel everything. She dressed quickly, her heart heavy with anticipation, and made her way downstairs. She wasn't surprised to find Alexander already awake, standing near the large bay windows of the study, staring out toward the entrance. He was waiting. "Did he leave?" she asked softly. Alexander shook his head. "He's still out there." Samantha hesitated before stepping closer. "You know you have to face him," he exhaled, his shoulders stiff. "I know." Before either of them could say more, the butler appeared at the door. "Mr. Carter is requesting an audience." Alexander glanced at Samantha, and for the first time, she saw something in his expression that unsettled her. Not fear, but something close to it. A reluctant acceptance of the inevitable. "Let him in," he ordered. The meeting took place in the grand sitting room, Eleanor watching from her chair with a regal calmness that belied the tension in the air. William Carter stepped forward, his presence sharp, his gaze locked onto Alexander. "You ruined my family," Carter said, his voice laced with years of resentment. Alexander remained unmoved. "Your father ruined himself. You manipulated the situation," Carter shot back. "You took everything from him, and now you expect me to let it go?" Silence stretched between them, thick with old wounds and unresolved pain. Samantha watched as Alexander's jaw tightened, but then something in his posture changed. He wasn't just the ruthless businessman anymore. He was the man who had carried this burden for too long. "I didn't destroy your father," Alexander finally said. "He made mistakes, and I did what I had to do to protect my family. But I won't let his failures ruin you too." Carter blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected shift in tone. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Alexander continued, "that revenge won't bring back what was lost, but I can offer you something else." Eleanor, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. "A way forward." Alexander nodded. "I'm willing to make things right not by undoing the past, but by giving you a future. If you're willing to let go of this grudge, I can help you rebuild." Samantha held her breath, watching Carter's expression shift from fury to uncertainty. For a long moment it seemed as if he would reject the offer. But then slowly he exhaled, the fight in his eyes dimming just slightly. "I'll think about it," he muttered before turning and walking away. As the doors closed behind him, Samantha turned to Alexander. "That was unexpected." Alexander exhaled. "I'm tired of fighting ghosts." Samantha reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "You did the right thing." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time, there was no hesitation, no doubt. Weeks passed, and the world slowly fell into place. William Carter did not return, but neither did his anger. Rumors in the business world hinted that he had taken Alexander's offer, though no one spoke of it outright. Eleanor, ever the quiet, architect of fate, smiled knowingly whenever Samantha entered the room, and Alexander, he had finally let himself breathe. One crisp autumn afternoon, Alexander took Samantha and Jake to the Hastings family estate's private gardens. Under the golden canopy of falling leaves, he knelt before her, a velvet box in his hands. Samantha gasped. "Alexander." "I spent so many years believing love was a weakness," he said, his voice steady, his eyes holding hers with certainty. "But you showed me it's the only thing that makes life worth living." Tears blurred her vision. As he opened the box, revealing a stunning sapphire ring, deep and unwavering just like the love they had built. "Marry me, Samantha." Her breath caught, her heart full to bursting. "Yes," she whispered, nodding, laughter and tears intertwining. As Alexander slid the ring onto her finger, Jake cheered, and Eleanor, watching from the terrace, wiped a tear from her eye, and just like that, the storm was over. The past had been reckoned with, the wounds mended, and the future stretched before them, wide open and filled with love. Wow, what a journey. Samantha and Alexander's love story was filled with heartbreak, redemption, and the power of second chances. But now, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what was your favorite moment in the story? Do you believe in second chances when it comes to love? And most importantly, where are you watching from? We'd love to know where our amazing audience is tuning in from. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another captivating tale. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more heartwarming and thrilling stories your way. Thank you so much for watching. We appreciate each and every one of you, and we can't wait to see you in the next story. Until then, take care and keep believing in the power of love.